Respond to the fact that Saab is offering 10,000 jobs if you go with the Gripen, but at the same time, Lockheed Martin says thousands of jobs could be lost if we don't go with the F-35. How are you balancing that?
Well, what I've said is I don't believe that we've had enough jobs created and industrial benefits done out of the F-35 contract. I think it's not enough. I think Canadians expect more, and we should get more.
Something is breaking inside North America's defense system. Something that was never supposed to happen. And it started with a single, unexpected move. One that sent shockwaves through Washington, rattled the Pentagon, and stunned Canada's own defense establishment. Because when Melanie Joly, Canada's foreign minister, stepped to the podium and openly questioned the F-35 fighter jet deal, the crown jewel of US-led military cooperation, she wasn't just making a comment. She was lighting a fuse.
Well, what I've said is I don't believe that we've had enough jobs created and industrial benefits done out of the F-35.
A fuse connected to billions of dollars, decades of defense planning, and a North American industry that has been quietly bleeding out for years. And now, behind closed doors in Ottawa and Washington, officials are scrambling, whispering, calculating whether Canada is about to do the unthinkable. Walk away from America's prized F-35 project and replace it with the Swedish-built Saab Gripen E. A jet that doesn't just fly, it promises to bring 10,000 Canadian jobs with it. Enough jobs to resurrect an entire aerospace sector that has been gasping for air. This isn't just a procurement story. This is an earthquake shaking the foundation of the US-Canada defense relationship, and the aftershocks could last for generations. Because if Canada pulls the trigger on this shift, everything changes. For years, the F-35 was supposed to be the future of the Royal Canadian Air Force, a shared platform used by the US, Britain, Japan, and a dozen other allies. A seamless, interoperable next-generation fighter that would bind Canada even closer to the American defense ecosystem. That was the promise. That was the sales pitch. But behind that promise was frustration, delays, exploding costs, endless upgrades, political battles, and a cold realization in Ottawa. Canada was paying for an aircraft it barely had control over, an aircraft it couldn't maintain without relying on American contractors, an aircraft whose industrial benefits, something Canada was promised from day one, were far smaller than what Canadian companies expected. For years, the Canadian government endured this quietly, trying not to disrupt the alliance, hoping the costs would stabilize, hoping the industrial offsets would finally arrive. But when the bills kept going up and the returns stayed flat, the patience began to crack. And that's why Joly's remarks hit like a hammer. Because she didn't mince words. She didn't hide behind bureaucratic language. She said what many officials were afraid to admit. The F-35 deal is not working for Canada. And suddenly, a question started swirling in Washington. If Canada isn't fully committed to the F-35, what does that mean for North American defense? What does it mean for NORAD modernization? For Arctic patrols? For joint operations that rely on shared logistics and shared technology? For the Pentagon, Canada's hesitation isn't just annoying, it's dangerous. In the United States, policymakers didn't expect this. Not after years of Ottawa reaffirming its participation. Not after billions already spent. Not after Canada signed the final purchase order just a few years ago. But something shifted. Something that has been building under the surface for decades. Canada's aerospace industry, once a global leader, has been fading. Factories in Quebec and Ontario have shut down. Thousands of workers have lost jobs. Young engineers have left the country. And the F-35 program, which was supposed to help sustain that industry, instead pushed it deeper into dependence. Yes, Canadian companies got contracts, but they were small, fragmented. Subcontracting roles that barely scratched the surface of what the country once built on its own. That's where the Gripen enters the story. Saab's offer wasn't just a military bid. It was an industrial revolution packaged as a fighter jet, full domestic production lines, transfer of technology, high-skilled work for 10,000 Canadians, a chance to rebuild what had been lost, a chance for Canada to reclaim its aerospace identity, not as a subcontractor to the United States, but as a country that can build its own advanced machinery again. And that's the part that has politicians salivating and defense hawks panicking. Because what happens if Canada chooses the Gripen? What happens if one of America's closest allies steps out of the F-35 ecosystem and builds its own path? For the Pentagon, this isn't just about one country. It's about the precedent. If Canada questions the value of the F-35 deal, others might follow. Allies in Europe, partners in Asia, governments that already feel the pressure of rising lifetime costs. Costs that have soared past $1.6 trillion for the entire F-35 fleet. Losing Canada would create cracks in a system the US spent 25 years constructing. A system designed to keep allies buying American, flying American, and depending on American maintenance hubs. Break one link, and suddenly the chain isn't as strong. But from the Canadian perspective, the frustration is real. The F-35's lifetime operating costs are projected to be far higher than originally promised. Parts shortages have caused grounded aircraft across multiple countries. Maintenance backlogs have stretched for months. And worst of all, Canada would still rely on the US for most repairs, no matter how many jets it buys. For a country that prides itself on sovereignty, that dependence is becoming a political liability. Meanwhile, Saab is offering something that feels almost too good to be true. Independence. Domestic control. A production line that would pump billions into Canadian towns and cities. A revival of high-skilled trades. Universities partnering with aerospace firms. A new generation of engineers with something to build for. The Gripen is less about the jet and more about the ecosystem around it. An ecosystem Canada desperately needs. And workers know it. In Montreal, in Toronto, in Winnipeg, you can hear the excitement. Unions are publicly cheering. Aerospace leaders are calling the offer transformational. Politicians who have spent years defending the F-35 are suddenly quiet, watching the public mood shift under their feet. 10,000 jobs aren't just numbers. They're votes, their families, their communities. This is why Joly's decision came when it did. Elections are looming, pressure is rising, and Canada's ruling party knows it needs a bold economic narrative to survive. The F-35 deal, in contrast, has become a political weak spot, easy to criticize, hard to defend, but even as Canadians debate their future, the US is pushing back. American defense officials are warning, sometimes subtly, sometimes bluntly, that moving away from the F-35 could jeopardize interoperability. They're pointing to NORAD, reminding Canada that joint defense relies on shared platforms. Behind closed doors, some are urging Ottawa to stay the course or risk damaging the partnership. What they don't say publicly, but what everyone understands, is that the US does not want to lose Canada as an F-35 partner. Not now. Not when geopolitical tensions are rising. Not when Arctic defense is becoming more important than ever. And yet Canada is at a crossroads. If it stays with the F-35, it accepts a future tied tightly to the US defense industry. Efficient, powerful, but directional. A future where Canadian aerospace companies compete for scraps in an American-centered system. If it pivots to the Gripen, it launches itself into a new era of domestic production, but risks backlash, delays, and political uncertainty. It could revive the Canadian aerospace sector, or it could isolate the country from the dominant American supply chain. This is the dilemma Joly has dropped onto the nation's doorstep. A dilemma that has no easy solution. What makes this moment even more dramatic is that nobody knows Joly's true intention. Is she preparing a full break from the F-35? Is she bluffing to force better industrial offsets from Lockheed Martin? Is she building public pressure to renegotiate the maintenance structure? Or is she simply exposing flaws that have long been kept quiet? Washington is watching every word. Ottawa is calculating every outcome. And Saab is waiting to see if its once-in-a-lifetime opportunity will become a historic victory. The stakes keep rising. How will Canada defend the Arctic in 2040? Will its next-generation aircrafts be built domestically or imported at enormous cost? Will thousands of Canadian engineers return to factories humming with production? Or will the country remain reliant on a U.S. maintenance pipeline that it cannot control? The deeper you look, the clearer it becomes that this fight is bigger than jets, bigger than budgets, bigger than politics. It is a struggle over who controls the future of Canada's industry, Canada's defense, and Canada's identity. And for the United States, it's a test of influence. A test of whether the world's strongest defense ecosystem can keep its closest ally inside its orbit, or whether economic opportunity will pull Canada in a new direction. As the story reaches its boiling point, one chilling truth emerges. This decision will define the next 40 years of North American air power. If Canada embraces the Gripen, it sends a message to the world that even America's closest partners can challenge U.S. defense dominance. It ignites hope in countries seeking industrial independence. It reshapes supply chains, alliances, and military planning. If Canada stays with the F-35, it reinforces American leadership and preserves the integrated defense network Washington has built for decades. But it also means Canada accepts a supporting role, strategically, industrially, and economically.